You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. This past weekend, Royal Winnipeg Ballet's Visions of Swan Lake streamed online in a modified version of the iconic ballet. Featuring awe-inspiring choreography, intricate costumes, and the breathtaking Tchaikovsky score played by the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, it was not a concert to miss. Now, thankfully, it returns for a second run this weekend, and to learn more about it, I'm joined by RWB Principal Conductor Julian Pellicano. Hi, Julian.
Hey, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. Always great to have you on the show. Congrats on your return to the podium to lead the WSO in selections from Swan Lake. Did you watch Visions from Swan Lake?
I did. I had a chance to watch it on Saturday night, and it was my first time to actually see the production. I didn't have any sneak previews, and I was totally blown away by, as usual, by what the company was able to do on that performance. Also, I was very happy with how the sound of the orchestra came out, and the play and their wonderful playing, and how that fit into the production. And not to mention the amazing visuals from Frank Digital. The camera work was I found it to be absolutely astounding. So I loved it.
Yeah, just to echo what you said, I watched it as well, and I was just so impressed. It was like what a pandemic production could be with that planning, right? The production value was stellar, it was cinematic, the dancers were captivating and beautiful, and of course, like you say, the orchestra sounded great. How did it feel to be back in front of your colleagues at the WSO, but this time in your role as RWB Principal Conductor?
I mean, it always feels good to work with my colleagues. In this case, it was a very interesting process because normally, of course, I have the dancers right in front of me on stage, and in this recording session, we recorded the music 3 weeks earlier. I had to sort of conjure images of the dancers, remembering the choreography and trying to understand what they need as I'm recording the music, I found it to be a totally different skill, to be honest.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about. Normally you're in the pit, the dancers are on the stage, and you're reacting to what they're doing on the stage. It's sort of like a dance between the orchestra and the dancers themselves. There's so much that goes into this. What changes for you? Did you draw on that past experience, like you say, conjure up those images of the dancers, or did you just work very closely with Tara Birtwistle and Andre Lewis at the RWB? How did that work?
Well, what I tried to do was recreate what I would normally do during any kind of production. And so luckily they were able to, luckily everyone felt that my presence in the studio was necessary to the outcome of the ballet. So I spent about 2.5 weeks in the studio with the dancers, who are currently split up into 3 different cohorts. So I would have to go from one studio to another studio each day to try and see each different part of the ballet. And, one of the challenges of this is that, I mean, we have, for example, archived recordings of past Swan Lakes, but with totally different dancers. And so each dancer, for certain sections will want the tempo a certain way, or the music to cadence or land a certain way. And so just taking those notes in the studio and really watching them and trying to understand the choreography that they're trying to execute for this production, and then just simply learn it and remember and sort of get it into your musical ear, and then when you're in front of the orchestra, make it happen.
Well, it came together really seamlessly. I mean, you can tell you did your homework. The dancers look very comfortable dancing to the recorded track. And like you said just a few minutes ago, it sounded so good too. I mean, I was blown away. I was watching it, and I had some speakers set up, and it sounded fantastic. Hard to believe just 25 players. In addition to the story being cut down, this sort of condensed version of Swan Lake, the bevy of swans, which I just learned is the term for a group of swans. I just learned that.
Okay.
Yeah, a bevy. Not nearly as big as the full ballet production, and the orchestra isn't as big either, of course. Tell us a little bit more about this 25-part ensemble and the group of musicians playing it.
Sure. Well, we started thinking about a possible collaboration over the summer, when we weren't exactly sure what might be possible. So my first step was to go into the RWB archives. And luckily, a few years ago, our archivist at the RWB, her name is Gail de Gagné, she actually went in and archived all of the RWB's musical holdings.
Hmm.
So every piece of sheet music, every score, every piece of paper, everything, no matter what it was, we have it archived. And in this case, it was really a lifesaver because I was able to go into the archives and see what we had. And luckily, the RWB used to tour with their own touring orchestra made up of musicians actually from all over Canada. And that ensemble just happened to be 25 players, which is the exact number of players that, under the current restrictions, we are working with as a maximum on stage at Centennial Concert Hall. So yeah, luckily we had the parts. I was able to take them sort of, of course they needed a little bit of work to bring them up to speed to be able to put them on the stands for musicians in 2021, because the production has changed since the last time these parts were played in the late 90s. But we had them, they were there. And this reduction was actually done in-house. It's a unique reduction to the RWB. The project was started in the 1960s by Richard Marcus, one of our former music directors, and sort of the final touches on it were done by Earl Stafford in the early 80s when the RWB Swan Lake was choreographed by Galina Yordanova. So it's an in-house score. It's unique to our company and unique to Winnipeg.
And it sounds like a whole bunch of serendipitous moments got you there. What are the chances that the archive happens to get sorted just before this would all happen? None of us knew it was coming. And then to have it there for 25 players. You mentioned the touring orchestra. I'm curious, any of the players who played in this production, were they a part of the former RWB touring ensemble?
Traditionally, the Winnipeg Symphony players are sort of the house band when the RW performs in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And the touring musicians would have been different. But I found out during the session, 2 of our musicians actually had played from these parts because, well, simply I asked them, has anyone ever seen these parts before? Because they're different from our full orchestra parts, which the orchestra is very familiar with. And 2 of our musicians, Ken McDonald, actually went on the final tour of Swan Lake with the touring orchestra in the late 90s. And Dan Schultz, when he was in high school out in Alberta, was hired as a violist on one of the first tours of the touring orchestra with Swan Lake.
Oh man, how cool is that? The world is small. It really, really is. And again, just all of these moments aligning, it really is special. Now, I do want to ask you a little bit more about Swan Lake itself. I mean, one of the most popular ballets in the repertoire. And when Tara Birtwistle and I were chatting about it, Tara, Associate Artistic Director of the RWB, she talked about how you can't not think Swan Lake when you think classical ballet. But interestingly enough, this ballet, hardly a hit when it was first performed. It was a bit of a flop, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, in 1877, it did not gain the popularity and reception that it has today, of course. And the next time that the ballet was seriously remounted was actually, unfortunately, after Tchaikovsky had already passed away. So the ballet was restaged and redone in St. Petersburg in 1895, and some of the music was reordered. And there was some other music added that was by Tchaikovsky, but not necessarily from Swan Lake, the ballet Swan Lake. So a piano piece that was orchestrated and then inserted into the ballet, and a little bit of reordering of the numbers. And a lot of that work was done by the Italian conductor and composer Riccardo Drigo, who was the conductor of the Imperial Ballet Theater in St. Petersburg at the time, the Mariinsky Theater.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. He didn't, as in Tchaikovsky, didn't see it in its final production. He died in 93, and like you say, staged in 95 with that choreography by Petipa and Ivanov. Do you know what caused it to flop? Like, it's hard to imagine, but it couldn't be the music, could it? I know ballet composition was very specialized, like Drigo as a composer, like Leo Delibes, for instance. Do you know what caused it to flop?
I can't say that I know exactly, and I have never seen a production of the original version in the original ordering. But my sense from the musical side is that the ballet world is a little bit different than the symphony orchestra world, and I could say that the opera world and the ballet world are similar in some respects. That, I mean, in the symphony orchestra world, we have a very urtext view of music, meaning that exactly, we are trying to get back to exactly what Haydn wrote on that day, and any alterations are not acceptable in this age. Of course, 200 years ago that was a different story, but today that's how we think of symphonic music. Ballet is somehow different. It has more of an evolving approach, and so these pieces are being, while they're being reinvented, not just choreographically and with regard to the costumes and the sets, also the music over the ages and over decades sort of is reworked and reimagined, and that's very, I feel like that's an acceptable way of producing music in the ballet world. And there are some things that are good about that. I think there are some changes that probably allowed Swan Lake to be more successful once the numbers were reordered and certain things were taken out and other things were put back in.
And then you've just taken that to the next step with this pared down, reduced down version.
Right.
Julian, it's really fantastic. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us at Classic 107 today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.